Welcome to Insight Builder channel, large language model automators, Python experts, and my dear friends. Deep dive into datasets for text classification in Argilla. So what is the purpose of a text classification dataset? It's to train the text classification model. Fine. What is the purpose of the text classification model then? The text classification model can be it can be a machine learning model or it can be a neural network model, but both of these models will take a text data input and it will output either class 1 or class 2. Basically, it will classify the text data input into class 1 or class 2. How this text classification model is trained? Because by default, these models that you see here will not have any knowledge, right? How these models are trained? To train the model, we have to take the existing text data input that we have already got from our domain, and we need to split them into class 1 and class 2 based on our knowledge. And so here you can see this is the domain data set, which is in form of text data inputs records. Basically, these records are here segregated as class 1 and this is segregated as class 2, and then this segregated data is provided to the trainers, and the trainers will create the neural network model or the machine learning model. Fine. The idea of the text classification dataset is going to sit here in this orange box, and inside the orange box the annotators also sit. So text classification datasets basically takes the text data input that is raw in nature. It allows the annotators to annotate these text data input into class 1 or class 2. That's how the text classification dataset works in Argilla. Now that we have looked into the basics of text classification and how the dataset is pre-processed inside the Argilla server, we are going to dive into the code right now. This notebook that you see will be shared with you guys in the description below using the GitHub repo link. The records and datasets.ipynb notebook will contain all the datasets that we are going to discuss, not just the text classification. So this particular notebook is having from end to end all the datasets. So you can use it as a reference along with trying to execute the code and see how the outputs happen in the Argilla server. Fine. Begin with I will execute this cell so that I can connect to this particular space where the Argilla server is hosted. And if you are new to this Argilla server and how to set up the Argilla server, then I would suggest you to look at the other videos in this playlist. That will be also attached along with the YouTube, this particular video. Fine. I am already connecting to this. I am going to execute this. It's connecting. If you're working on a new Argilla server, that means you will not have any workspace. So you have to create the workspace after you run this init command. In this case, it's better to create your own workspace with the name that you like. I have used a HF Argilla here. Next, you can actually list the workspaces, and also if you want to create some annotator users, you can do that, but these are all not mandatory. These are all some things that you can practice regularly. Fine. What we are going to right now dive into is the text classification dataset, right? In case of Argilla, there are a couple of ways to create the text classification dataset. So the generation 1 text classification dataset, it starts by creating a text classification setting. So that's a class that takes a label schema, and this label schema will tell to the dataset that what are the different classes that is going to be present in the text classification dataset. There are a couple of ways of text classification also. There is just a single label where the text can be either class 1 or class 2, or it can be multi-label, where a single text can be classified into multiple classes, like a particular thread. For an example, if you have a mouse in your hand, it can be classified as an electronic device. It also can be classified as a peripheral for your laptop or for your computer. So these kinds of things can also be done along with this text classification dataset that you're going to see. This is a traditional generation 1 dataset in Argilla server. What you need to do is you have to give the label schema, and then you have to configure. So you have to use this configure dataset settings function, and you need to provide the name of the dataset. Following that, you need to provide this setting. This dataset name that you're going to provide will be the reference for pushing the records to the dataset, and this settings will be this particular class settings, and you need to provide the workspace for all the activities that you do with the Argilla server, like pushing or pulling the datasets. So ensure that this workspace argument is required for almost all of the activity. Now that I have provided you the brief introduction about this the code, then I'm going to execute this code, and let us actually dive back to the server, and you'll see in the server we will have this YT. Just a minute, let me zoom in. So you'll see that YTTC, that is YouTube text classification set. So if you click that, you'll see that it's actually empty, nothing is there, right? If you go back and if you click on the settings, you'll see that it is having two labels, class 1 and class 2, nothing else, and it is giving an option to delete, etc. Now let us go back and let us push some records to this. The record for the text classification dataset has to be in using the class text classification record, and the text classification record takes 3 different arguments. As of now, I'm going to use only the text argument, and I'm going to just push this sentence, and to everybody's wonder, it will actually get registered into the dataset. So in order to register the record into the dataset, we need to use the log function. So these are functions and classes related to generation 1 datasets. We will also look into the generation 2 dataset in the same video, so stay tuned for that in a couple of minutes. Let's proceed further. I'm going to execute this. You'll see that this text classification record will create the record, and then the log will push the record to YTTC set. You can see one record is logged, and it will give you the link where it is getting recorded. This particular Hugging Face Up space is private, so you will not be able to directly connect to this without the Hugging Face Up API key. So you don't need to worry about that. I'm sharing this. It's already completely blocked. Let's proceed and look at the YTTC set. You will see that there is a data right now. It's wonderful time to be alive, and nothing has been selected here. So if I click on class 1, once I click on it, you will see that this validate option comes up on the top. That means that one record has been validated, meaning if I am an annotator and if I click on class 1, that means I have classified this particular sentence as class 1 manually. So this is called as annotation process. So if I click on class 2, it will actually change. And now if someone is going to pull out the responses for this data set, they will see that class 2 as the annotation. Okay, so this is done manually. What if you need to do the same annotation using code, using Python client? For that, you can actually use this kind of prediction, and following that, actually you can also add the annotation also. So let me share you the next step, where you are going to create one more data set, but you are going to add this prediction argument, and then you are going to execute this. So this prediction argument is still output that has come from a model. Assume that this is a prediction that has been done by a model, and the model says that this particular line, this particular sentence is class 1 30% of the time and class 2 70% confident. And if you go to the dataset right now, you'll see that there is one more dataset. If you refresh this, you'll see there is one more dataset, and yeah, you can see that now the UI looks different. So last time the UI looked like this, there was no any percentage, but now there is two additional percentages that is provided. One is for class 1 and one is for class 2. But still nothing has been selected. So this is a prediction that has been provided by the model. or by someone else, uh, whomever it is. But the annotator has to click any one of these options, and then the record will get validated. So that's how this works. The third thing is that you give the annotation directly in the record itself. So in this case, there is text, there is prediction, and then there is annotation. Annotation tells that it is class 2. So if I execute this right now, you will see that the record gets pushed to the Argilla. And if you refresh this, there will be third record right now. There will be 3 records, and you'll see that I did not click anything. By default, class 2 is coming as validated because this particular annotation was already selected and then it was pushed. So these kinds of updates can be done if you're going to do it through Python. The reason why I'm sharing this step by step is so that you can understand what happens for every modification that you do in the arguments. This way of reviewing the operations of Argilla backend as well as the Python client, Argilla Python client, will be necessary if you're going to work with more complex tutorials that is going to come next in your tenure as you are going to work with large language models. Fine. So this is on single label, right? Meaning it's going to be either class 1 or class 2. Next, what you're going to see is we are going to look at, there are lots of other records that you can take it as examples and you can try it out. I'm not going to go through this. It's the same thing again. But now I'm going to enter into multi-label. So what's multi-label? Meaning in case of the text classification, one record can be labeled into multiple different classes. So there is always a lot more to explore. Can be considered as work. It can be considered as something to play with, or it can be considered as excited. So this particular sentence can be labeled into multiple classes. So let us create this record. But when you create this record, you have to create a separate label schema, meaning you have to create a new dataset itself. If you try to push this dataset into, if you try to push this record, the new record that you created that has multi-label equal to true, into this dataset that you created with this label schema, it will error out because the label schema will not match with the record that you are pushing. So it will error out. So you need to create a new dataset with the excited, annoyed, work and play. So these are the annotation as well as these are the classes, and then you need to configure it. Let me execute it, and I'm going to configure the dataset, and I'm going to give the name as TCML. So once I configure the dataset, this TCML dataset will get written to the Argilla server, and then I can log the record. So the REC TCML record will get written to the TCML dataset in workspace HFGilla. I'm going to execute this, and if you go back and if you go to home, you will see that there is a new dataset called as TCML, and inside the TCML you will see that it's already validated because I've already given the annotation as work and play, and you can also see that the various other labels are provided here. You can also go back here and you can look at the settings. If you click here, you can see under the settings there are 4 labels. So this is the 4 labels that we provided here. So as you explore these things step by step and see how the how the arguments that you give in Python SDK gets transferred into Argilla server, you can try to relate it in a more holistic and easily visualizable format. Fine. So this is about text classification in the Gen1 dataset. Now we are going to dive into the Gen2 dataset where we are going to use the feedback dataset. So let me explore that and I will show it to you in a minute. As we have seen in the earlier video that I introduced the overview of the datasets, we saw that in order to create a feedback dataset, we have to give all these 5 arguments, that is fields, questions, metadata, vectors, and guidelines. This can be a tedious process, and you have to understand a lot of things about the fields, questions, metadata, vectors, and guidelines, which I'm going to dive into it later. But right now, there is a shortcut that has been provided by Argilla team. instead of using instead of creating these questions fields manually, there is a method that is provided along with the feedback data set class. It's called as it's based on the templates for individual NLP tasks. So we are actually doing a text classification task. So we can actually initiate a feedback data set with the template for text classification. So the method is actually called as for text classification. Let us dive into the code and take a look at it. In the same notebook that we discussed the earlier text classification generation 1 dataset, if you scroll down, you will see this area, exploring feedback datasets with templates. So this is the cells that follow this particular cell will contain the examples that I am discussing right now. So I'll be in the next videos also, I'll be providing this kind of a markers so that you can go to that particular area in the notebook and you can start practicing it. In the middle there will be other things that I've explored, and if you want you can actually explore it, those cells also. If you want you can read through the code and you can try to understand what has happened. But if you're following this video, just scroll down to that particular area and you can follow it from there. Let's proceed. I'm going to import feedback dataset and feedback record from Argilla, and I'm going to use this particular syntax right now. So I'm going to call the feedback dataset class, and I'm going to use this method for text classification as I explained to you, and I'm going to give the information, the necessary points that I need to add. So I need to give the labels. You saw that we gave the labels for the text classification records. We are going to say that it's not going to be multi-label. We are going to say use markdown equal to true, guidelines none. You can actually change this guideline. You can because this guideline is something that you can easily update. So it's a single line of text, so not much you need to provide. Read carefully and provide your feedback. Right, so this is going to be a kind of a small guideline that we can provide. You can make this guideline as elaborate as possible in order to make aware of some inherent biases the annotators might have, and then ask them to correct it if they are having this bias. And the metadata properties and vector settings also we are going to say none. So let's go back for a second, and if you look at this, all these fields that we spoke about right now, arguments, that is fields, questions, metadata, vectors, and guidelines. In this case, if you see, I am updating all of these things. But there are two things that is new. That is labels. There is this multi-label, and rest of the things are same, using markdown, guidelines, metadata, vector settings. But there is one thing that is missing. Where is the questions? So what happens in case of this using this method that for text classification is the questions are automatically created in the backend. So these templates have the questions already defined and kept ready. So once you execute it, this kind of question will get created. So a label question will get created where the name label will be provided, and the labels that you provide here will come and sit in this location. So that's how the for text classification works. So you don't need to really provide the questions. We will anyway look at how to create the feedback record manually. I have already shown how to create this in earlier demo videos, but after completing all these templates, I will show you how to do it manually. So stay tuned for that. Here I am going to define the text class dataset from the template, and I'm going to define the record. So in the record, I'm just going to give this fields, and this field has to be a dictionary, and the dictionary key has to match with this particular name that is there by default created inside the inside this feedback dataset for text classification. So these things you have to understand, and once you review this video as well as the documentation, it will be straightforward. But if you don't understand this, then if you give a different name here, it will actually error out. And that's pretty frustrating when you are trying to do some basic toy data set, and if you are trying to push it into Argilla server, and if it errors out, you have to read a lot the error, you have to review the documentation after that. but that's why I felt that it's better to make a video and show all these things in detail. Right, so this is about how you create the record. And then in order to, you have to first of all see, you see that you are creating the data set here, and you are creating the record. That is the second step. And the third step is you are adding the data set, sorry, you are adding the record to the data set. So this is all done in step by step, and then finally you are pushing it to Argilla. So you are not pushing the data set to Argilla first. If you do that, then this TS text class will lose the connection with this feedback dataset for classification object. Keep that in mind. So you will not be able to directly push the record into this object after that. You have to again call the dataset from Argilla, and then only you can do it. It's a little bit tedious, so follow this process only. So create the dataset, create the record, add the record, and then push it to Argilla. And this time it is going to be ts template underscore rec, that is text classification template record. So that's what this name implies. And most important point is that keep the naming convention uniform, meaning that I have kept a naming convention which talks about the task. It tells about the way I'm creating this task, that is using templates. And then this is going to be kind of a keyword that I talk about. So you can say it as a record, or you can actually say it as dataset also. So you can change like this, and you can keep it as a constant. So once you keep these things as a constant, like the variable names, the dataset names, the record names, then it will be very easy for you to follow and get the tutorials to work in a streamlined fashion without much of an error. So let's proceed and let us execute. So as you can see here, the moment I try to execute, I am actually facing an error. So let's actually open that up, and you can see that HFGilla is not defined. So this is a very simple error, because I had to convert this variable into a string, and I'm going to execute it right now. And you'll see that it actually should go through, and I should be able to view this data set in the Argilla UI in the backend. So you can see that dataset has been successfully pushed, and you can see that entire class details are provided here, and it talks about remote text field, remote label question, and everything is remote. So here, why it is called as remote? Because this particular output, I mean the response, is coming from the Argilla server. And that's about what you are going to see inside the code. Let us go back to the UI. So in the UI, if you go to home, now you'll see that TC templates DS that we created just a moment ago, and you can see the text that we created, and now this is actually pending. So we have not given the annotation yet. And you can see the label that we have created, super or duper. You can click on one of those things and you can submit. This is different to what you saw in the text, the Gen1 dataset. So if you go here, you do not see any kind of submit button. You did not see any kind of high more futuristic looking the labels, etc. These are all plain, right? But take a look at the Gen2 dataset. This is like fully well designed for best looking outputs. So you have to now click on submitted, then only you will be able to look at. So you can see that the label name and the design is completely different, and you can have a submit here. And also you can actually click on train, and you will see that there are various options that you can learn here also. So how to train using these datasets that you are right now creating. So you can go through these things and you can explore it. Apart from that, also there are various ways to filter and sort that I will discuss in detail in the coming videos. So let us go back to the discussion that we are having. So we have looked at the deep dive into datasets for text classification. We have seen what is the purpose of a text classification dataset, and we saw that how the text classification dataset is used for neural networks. And then we understood that we have to annotate the data for sending it to the model. And we also saw two ways of creating text classification datasets using the Gen1 text classification classes and Gen2 feedback dataset classes. We saw that, and we also saw how we can annotate it and how the UI looks different for both of the generations. From there, we did some coding on how to push the data from the Python client to Argilla server also. So with all this, I think you would have learned a very good, deep understanding of text classification dataset in Argilla. If you have any questions or comments, do leave it in the comment section. Do leave a like to this video and share it with others. Do subscribe to my channel for further updates. I'll be covering all the rest of the datasets in the coming series of videos. With that said, I would like to leave this video with 4 words, that is practice, 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 practice. See you guys. Have a great time.